So the way we're going to run this is that each of us, including myself, will just give a little background on our organizations, our missions, how we get our work done. And each person will have a turn to do that. They're going to introduce themselves. And then we're going to do one round of questions in a moderated style, but then I really want to get the microphones in your hands so that you can drive the Q&A session. We'll have a chance to ask Jessica questions as well as the rest of the folks on the team. Okay, so my name's Lisa Micheli. I'm the founding director of the Pepperwood Foundation. And Pepperwood is located up in the mountains between Napa and Sonoma counties on the Sonoma County side. And we are a living laboratory for climate and wildfire resilience. Every day my team is studying the land, water, and wildlife. We're all scientists and educators. So that everyone from our elementary school students to elected politicians can become better stewards of this earth and help sustain this planet that's sustaining us. Our 3,200-acre reserve we think of it as a living laboratory. It was originally gifted to the California Academy of Sciences, and then a local group of philanthropists launched it to be really serving the community. We have used cutting-edge technology to instrument the heck out of the property. So since 2010, we've been measuring weather, water, wildlife, and wildfire. We were the first site and an advocate for the Wildfire Alert North Bay camera program. So we have the cameras that look down at Lark Field and into Knights Valley. And then what's really exciting is in partnership with CAL FIRE and CDFW, we utilize the property as a demonstration site for reducing hazardous fuels while we're also protecting biodiversity and protecting our water supply. So we have a vegetation management plan in place with CAL FIRE, and we work with all the local fire agencies to do mechanical thinning and conservation grazing and prescribed fire. And we're really probably one of the biggest burners around. And thanks to having a Native Advisory Council, which has been in place at Pepperwood since, I guess, '09, we're really trying to pave the way as we reset this landscape to move from traditional prescribed fire towards cultural fire. And what does that mean? So I think that's what I had to cover. There is some summary of our strategic plan outside if you're interested, and please come contact me if you want to come visit, because I'd love to host any of you anytime. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marko Bay. Introduce himself.
Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marko Bay. I'm Executive Director of Lomakatsi Restoration Project. I'm also the President and CEO of Lomakatsi Ecological Services Incorporated. We're a nonprofit organization. We're based in Ashland, Oregon, and El Torres, California. I have an office over there as well. And our mission is to restore ecosystems and the sustainability of communities, cultures, and economies. So it's a triple bottom line approach. We've heard a lot about that throughout the conference and throughout today. So thinking about the ecological, the economic, and social to make us successful in creating resilient landscapes and communities in the context of dry forest systems or fire-adapted systems. So, Deputy Morse spoke a lot about these issues and set the stage pretty well for the departure of these ecosystems. The last 100 to 150 years of the exclusion of fire, the departed landscapes, the infilling, the threats to communities, ecosystem services. So I'll just share a couple of examples of how we're trying to abate those threats. And there's a photo behind me of the Black Hills Ecosystem Restoration Project. Margot Robbins shared this yesterday, and I was proud to see it. So what that photo represents is not just the success of ecologically based thinning, and that's some of the largest old ponderosa pine in the Upper Klamath Basin is in that stand and in that landscape. So we have large old trees that have infilled. We also have represented there a project that's managed through collaboration. And these instruments are so important. We utilize stewardship authorities. This is on federal lands. It's actually the former reservation forest of the Klamath tribes. 1960s, the Forest Service, after termination of the tribe, the Forest Service took over management. So now the tribe, and through partnerships with Lomakatsi, the Nature Conservancy, and the Forest Service, we've implemented about 40,000 acres of treatment. So these are landscape scale treatments. So we are thinking about the WUI, we are thinking about communities, but we're also thinking about our wildlands, a landscape scale, thinking about quantitative risk assessments. Where do we invest these limited dollars? Even though it's a watershed of funding right now, the landscape is broad and the departure is great. So we have to be very tactical and invest in the right places, the right locations. So in that project, we removed quite a bit of commercial timber in an ecological way. We marketed that timber through Stewardship Authority. We're able to sell those logs, and then those dollars can be reinvested back into activities like you see there, prescribed burning. And then through all that work, there's capacity development, workforce training and development. At Lomakatsi, we have a tribal partnerships program. Belinda Brown spoke yesterday on the panel with Margot Robbins and Trina from Maidu Consortium. So really building that workforce capacity, building, incubating small businesses, training programs, infusing dollars into communities, and it's been addressed already. But that photo is an indicator. You can see the picture also of small trees being thinned around 350-year-old ponderosa pine. So in addition to that, we have another project in Oregon, and I'll get to California in a second because we're a two-state organization. It's called the West Bear All Lands Restoration Project. It's right adjacent to the Almeda fire that burned through the riparian area, through Talent, Oregon, all the way up into Medford, was devastating. So mobilizing that workforce to do ecological work during the shoulder seasons, and then that workforce right now on our crews, we're deployed on fire up in the Willamette Valley. Our engine resources, our hand crews, when they come off a fire, they're going to be lighting fire. They're going to be putting good ecological fire on the ground. So in the Almeda fire footprint, the West Bear project, it's a 27,000 acre area, and we're trying to work on landscape scale. We're thinking about ingress and egress for wildfire safety and response, home site defensible space, but also strategic ridgelines on where we can restore open dry forest habitat, benefit wildlife, but also create tactical locations to both apply fire and suppress fire if needed. So this is done through the quantitative risk assessment, through the U.S. Forest Service and Nature Conservancy, our partners. But these assessments are great, but how do you put them on the ground? How do they actually actualize with people and resources? And that's what we're able to demonstrate through that project. We've been able to leverage about $11 million recently. So this is managing private philanthropic funds, federal dollars, state program funds, and tribal dollars to make all the elements of this project happen. So the workforce is doing the NEPA work on these projects. In Belinda's band area, the co-selected band, we just completed, we have a 20,000 acre project, and this is in Modoc County in northeastern California. Often forgot about that way far corner of the state with 4 federally recognized tribes in our county. We were able to do common stand exams, goshawk surveys, cultural resources, because the Forest Service capacity is limited. And then we're working across all lands with our state agency partners, our tribes, to leverage and thread together a landscape scale treatment that's going to benefit wildlife, nature, and the communities. So that's just a brief snapshot into some of the things we do. And then post-fire recovery, having a workforce that can be employed 12 months a year. This seasonal model, and I come from the mobile forestry workforce from the late 80s with the Forest Service, this boom and bust of a seasonal workforce is challenging. So how do we retain people? How do we train them to do technical work? How do we have equitable jobs that it's not just top-down, only for college-educated folks, but also bottom-up kinesthetic learners? We see that in our tribal communities. So how do we build that capacity, retain that capacity all year round on a variety of activities on the ground, from wildland fire suppression to prescribed burning to stream restoration to survey work. So we have a model that's been demonstrated now for 27 years. We're really proud of it, proud of our partners in the state and federal agencies and tribes and other NGOs, and very thankful of After the Fire and all their efforts. So I'll leave it at that for a moment. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start my introduction with the fact that I got stung in the face, so if it looks like I had bad Botox, you know what's going on. My name is Casul. I am lucky enough to be the CEO of Circuit Rider Community Services, and our focus is on at-risk youth. In this context, we're talking about our vocational programs, where we pay a living wage to our young people so that they can continue to have a roof over their heads and food on the table, and they go out and they do something in the world that has a positive ecological and community benefit while they're learning a skill for the rest of their career. Most of our work right now happens to be in fire fuels. So we teach our young people how to use two-strokes, chainsaws, weed eaters. If you've ever worked with those tools, you know that they break down all the time, so just as important how to use them, how to repair them and work on them. Same thing with chippers. Our young people also get to, as I call it, play around with fire a little bit. They, through a partnership with the County of Sonoma and through private landowners, get to go out and carry out prescribed pile burns, sub 3 acre burns, and then through a partnership with CAL FIRE, our young people have been able to go out and work on larger prescribed fire. Within this next year, what we're really pushing for is to get funding to teach our young people how to do prescribed grazing and rotational grazing. This is pretty personal for me. I'm a 7th generation rancher on land that my family has tended for 170 years. And I learned from my grandparents that cyclical piece of in the winter and the spring, the animals would come through, they'd graze everything down, we'd come in behind them and burn, and then the summers we would clear and pile to burn. Although I do have to share that my grandfather's way of prescribed burns was not exactly the best. He would sit there and light his tobacco pipe, throw a match in to burn it, and if it got out of control, just whack it with a shovel. So some things have changed for the better. And my hope is for this next generation that we can train these young people, these fire fuel mitigators, to be able to walk onto these large landscape level properties. And they can look at those properties and know what treatments are appropriate in what season. They're going to say, this is where we're going to permanently fence to graze, to rotationally graze. This is where we're going to prescribe graze with electric. This is where we're going to put some good fire on the ground. This is where we're going to do manual. Because every property is different and every need is different. And right now we're all very siloed in those 3 pieces, what I like to call the 3 legs of the stool of fire fuel mitigation. And I want to train that next generation, what I was raised in, how to use all of those in order that we can have a healthier ecology and a safer community. And I will pass on to Molly with the caveat that as a large private landowner, I realize that it is extremely expensive and somewhat intimidating to treat my forest land after a generation of fire suppression, and without the leadership and the funding from people that are thinking a little bit differently, we could not do that. So I want to say thank you for all that you do.
The one planning piece that we had in preparation for this panel was I asked Che not to throw shade at my program. So thank you.
They haven't funded me yet.
Yeah, we haven't. We're going to get there, though. Hi, everybody. My name is Molly Curley O'Brien. I am the Director of Grants and Government Programs here at After the Fire. Just to quickly say this, I'm just so humbled and excited to be in this room talking about this today, especially in this panel with these esteemed colleagues. So thank you so much for having me. I wear a lot of hats in this organization and After the Fire. You probably saw me setting up lunch or trash the last couple of days, but in addition to all of the hats that I wear, one of the ones that I wear that I feel so proud to do so is running the North Bay Forest Improvement Program. So Deputy Morse talked a little bit about CFIP, California Forest Improvement Program. The North Bay Forest Improvement Program is reflected of the best parts of that, and being able to take that program and, more importantly, those dollars and bring them even more down to the ground and to a regional focus. So the North Bay Forest Improvement Program cannot be done on its own. After the Fire is the project manager and lead agency for this program. We hold the contract with CAL FIRE. But we can't do it without the help of our local resource conservation districts in Sonoma, Napa, Mendocino, and Lake County, and then specifically looking at Lake County again, the nonprofit up there, Clear Lake Environmental Research Center. Yes, we applaud them, and Will Evans, Executive Director, they are fabulous. So what is it? I can talk about it in length, but essentially what we are doing is we are taking public dollars funded through CAL FIRE, both from Prop 68 and from block grants that they have, and creating a funnel and pipeline to be able to fund fire resilience activities on private land. So again, Deputy Moore said, small parcel private land ownership in California is 25% of the entire forested land. Let's expand that a little bit for a second to really see the magnitude of why this type of project is needed. Sonoma County, Private land ownership, 90%. Napa County, 75%. Mendocino, 75%. Even Lake County is upwards of 60%. So again, if we are only taking public dollars to do treatment, fire resilience treatment on public land, we are not seeing a 360-degree view of what resilience can really look like. So we are inventing this, and this is an innovative model, never to be done in any capacity across the American West. We are doing it here, and it's really exciting, and you know what? It's working. So you can see here, this is Monan's Rill, an intentional community here in Sonoma County. This is one of the first contracts that was signed with the North Bay Forest Improvement Program, and we completed it. And you know what? They got paid on time. That's a 25-acre project where they received through the cost incentive program, part of the North Bay Forest Improvement, where the program covers either 60% or 80% of the total cost of these activities. They received $25,000 to do this work. And they did it, and they received the reimbursement check within 60 days, as that is part of our contract, and we uphold that as a high value in how we get this implemented. I'll stop there because obviously you can tell that I'm excited about it, but there's questions to be able to get more of that later.
So a question I have for all of you, including the Deputy Morse, is what role does collaboration play in your work? I mean, we heard a lot of highlights of it, but especially what do you think is the special sauce of a successful collaboration, and what are pitfalls you might recommend avoiding in your experience of building collaborations? You want to start, Marko? And
Sure.
Love to hear from you too, Jess.
Yep. Yeah, so collaboration's been, it was a discussion this morning in some of the questions, and some great examples. I will say Oregon has done a really forward-thinking job for many years. So if you go back to the boom and bust economy of the big tree economy, it was here in California as well. It built the churches, the schools, the infrastructure, the large tree, old tree, big tree economy that drove a lot of our economic pulse. When that transitioned through one side of the environmental community, suing the Forest Service, the federal government, and then you had industry on the other side through clear cutting and high intensity harvest, what we have created is the radical middle. And that's what collaboration has, many years of bringing that together. So the collaboration that we're involved with, and if I could speak to California, there's the Western Klamath Restoration Partnership with the Karuk tribe, with the U.S. Forest Service, with many non-government partners in the Mid-Klamath that are implementing some large-scale projects through Stewardship Authority and other authorities. It's setting up a governance structure. So a lot of it is about how we do business together, different agreements. I was just on a call right before this panel with another collaborative called the Klamath-Siskiyou Oak Network, where we were just awarded some substantial funds to treat a landscape area for oak habitat, but also fire and fuels. It's having those agreements in place, those governance orders, how each partner is going to work together, how they're going to share funding, how they're going to make decisions. And that's why you see a good output put on the land when we're trying to scale up the pace and scale of ecological forestry and fuels management. We need those collaborative groups intact, and collaboration is a discipline. So when we're working with tribal partners, with federal agencies, we have to learn the different culture of every entity we work with, and then how are we sharing money, resources, and decision-making. So we're seeing this model even in California. We're trying to bring it to the Modoc National Forest right now. Some of our lessons learned in Oregon, and then there's some great lessons learned in California around collaboration that we're bringing to Oregon. So part of it is knowing each other's roles and responsibilities, how we're going to pass money. So entities are sub-awarding each other funds. We're nonprofits that are using different instruments. And then how do we actually put that on the ground? We've set up different subcommittees, ecological monitoring committees, implementation review team. So we're ensuring that our treatments are done in an ecological way, but also meeting the needs for fire and fuel. An outreach team, Aliana, our communications staff, serves on a communications committee for one of our strong collaboratives. I encourage you to look them up, the Rogue Forest Partners, who I believe is setting a national model on collaboration. So this is the kind of threading together we're going to have to do in order to get these large landscape projects together. And just in closing, in Oregon, in the Rogue Basin, we have a 4.6 million acre watershed within the Rogue Basin. We know we have to treat 1.1 million of those departed acres, high fire departed acres. In order to do that, we need to be treating about 30,000 acres a year. So Lomakatsi, we're treating about 16,000, but across 2 states. So if we focus that energy, it's only going to happen through collaboration and through zones, what we call zones of agreement. So I'll stop there, but collaboration is key to increasing that pace and scale.
I'd say for Sonoma County, one of the biggest issues that we have is a lot of our forest land is privately owned. And rural folks can be, let's say, private people. So having a safe place where that they can come and talk to somebody like myself or Fire Forward, and they have that connection to funding, and then the service providers that can come in, like my teams, where they can come in and cut, where Fire Forward can come in and burn. UC Davis can hook them up with people to come in and graze on their properties. So in a large sense, being able to bring in all of these service providers, and most importantly, those funding pieces, is where I see us working with these private landowners to affect larger landscape level change.
Could you just define what Fire Forward is for folks who are from out of the area? Yeah.
Sorry,
'Cause
Fire
we're part of
Forward
that
is our
too. It's a
local
great
good
example.
fire organization helping to put prescribed fire and good fire on the landscape.
I mean, I think this is pretty well covered, but from the statewide perspective, we do see the local collaboratives as the anchor. And we're actually seeing collaboratives at every level in the state, right? Our partnership, the California Forest and Wildfire Resilience Task Force is coordinating across, which I encourage all of you to sort of engage with. That is co-chaired by California Natural Resources Agency, Federal Forest Service, a tribal leader. And so we want to make sure, and also a rural county representative. And so you have that sort of breadth of thinking at the statewide level, because that is needed, all the way down to investing in local collaboratives at the regional and most local level. And so we've tried to make sure that all of our investments are empowering and expanding that local collaborative, because we understand that the problem set is so complicated and so and the jurisdictions engaged are so bifurcated. You know, it's like you look at a map, it's just a mosaic, and so of ownership, and so you can't just, there's no one entity or organization or person that could just say, okay, I'll fix it, don't worry, you guys stay home. You know, that it can't function unless you have a collaboration because of the nature of the problem set. And so we're making sure that these collaboratives are both bringing all of the stakeholders who have the property that needs to get mitigated on board, but also brings the resources and creates sort of a giant green arrow that says put dollars here, and then also brings in the sort of myriad of expertise that you need to be able to address this problem set well.
This is an all hands on deck thing, right? Oh.
Yeah. Yes.
Hello, everybody. Let's take a breath in. We're feeling okay. This is an all hands on deck thing, and so not having collaboration is the antithesis of that. And so, you know, bringing all of the folks in the room as we see a more and more complex problem, and then also implementing more and more complex solutions, right? So the folks who are at the table, you know, before all of these conversations were really starting at the level that they are now, they just need more people, and they need different types of skill sets to be able to do that. So what that looks like in terms of collaboration for the North Bay Forest Improvement Program is allowing the registered professional forester to do his job that he was trained to do. Wow. What a radical concept. And then bringing in a project manager like me, or my person who I can't do this without, Rosa Brandt over there, to be able to make sure that we are in compliance, to make sure that people are getting paid, to make sure that people know that this is an opportunity out there to be a frontline resource to help people understand what needs to take place in order for them to apply. And essentially, again, it goes back to this idea of 360-degree resilience. It's allowing the folks, the subject matter experts, to be able to implement that subject matter and their expertise, and allowing me, as essentially the glorified cat herder, which I take very seriously, to be able to do the cat herding that needs to get done. Because both of those activities are incredibly important, and together they are the collaboration to get through past, to cross that finish line.
I love how you emphasize, you know, helping. I mean, we have 2 registered foresters, I think, in Sonoma County. And before Molly and Rosa stepped in, they were literally the outreach program, the education program, all those things. And one of the movements we've been involved with, too, is helping landowners like Monan's Rill work together. So that the foresters had said very clearly, if you, especially in this parcelized landscape, if you can get a number of people to team up and develop a plan, and I can stamp that once instead of stamping 52 plans, that's huge for us in this fragmented landscape in particular. So I really appreciate all the work that you're doing and how you brought those pieces together. And I'm reminded, my friend Wendy Elliott, who used to run Sonoma Land Trust, said, I always think you shouldn't collaborate unless you have to. But we have to, right? And we have to also, I think, Marko, your point about roles and responsibilities, like let each member of the team play their superpower and see how those fit together. It's really great, and have clarity. With that, I'd like to open it up. And I don't know, do we have Kyle and Jennifer running microphones for the audience? Can we see who's interested in asking some questions? We've got one over there, or not? Okay, that will do. I will do it. Actually, I like to walk around just to get a little more fresh breath going. Yes, could you introduce yourself and then ask your question?
Hi, I'm Doug Bevington, and I have a question for Deputy Morse. In your presentation, you talked about a 3-ring approach to lands. And one of those 3 is the community and home hardening piece. We heard a number of, or we saw some really compelling presentations yesterday about the effectiveness of that home hardening. And I in looking at the Newsom administration budget for fire preparedness, last year there was, I think, less than 4% of that budget went towards community hardening and home hardening. This year, I think it's even lower than that. I know it's easy to say we'd like more money for that, but my question for you is, what percentage of the fire preparation budget do you think should go towards community hardening?
Thanks, Doug, and appreciate you being here. So I think it's important that we start with kind of the right facts. So it certainly wasn't 4%. So there's a couple things about the home hardening program you need to understand. So there's a specific new program for low-income homeowners in California in which the state is investing 10%, and in the state budget it's only going to be a $25 million line item, but that actually turns into 90% in additional investment from the federal government, from FEMA. So it's a cost share program. So that opens up to what, 100 and something million off the top of my head. I'll let you do the math. But so that's over $100 million in a brand new home hardening pilot just for lower income Californians. In addition, we have over $300 million for the fire prevention grant program. So those grants go to anything that the community collaboratives are wanting, right? Which includes home hardening programs, defensible space programs. So that's what the fire safe councils are then designing. So those are designed specifically to be nimble enough that they could go to fuel breaks, they could go to home hardening. And then in addition, where you're actually going to see the most value out of home hardening is really with incentivizing. You want the state and the feds to be able to come in and help the homeowners that can't afford to do it. But a lot of the homes that need to be hardened are simple retrofits that homeowners can do themselves. And so that's why we're investing in education outreach, that's your UC advisors, your defensible space inspectors, go door to door, right? And actually talk to people about how to improve not only their defensible space, but their home hardening. CAL FIRE's come out with an app now that homeowners can use to be able to assess, did we do this right? And I think one of the most compelling pieces is right now what we're working on with the Department of Insurance. They just rolled out regulations in the state that would say, that would give actual discounts to communities and individual parcels. So if you've got your own home hardened and have done your defensible space, you get a discount. Plus, you get additional discounts when your entire neighborhood has reached that saturation level and you have fuel breaks around the community. So there's a level of criteria that CAL FIRE provided technical expertise to the Department of Insurance to help identify what that criteria is. And we're hoping that that will be a potential motivator for homeowners to be able to take action, but by motivating it for collective action as well, that's where you're gonna hit that saturation level. So yeah, if you're only looking at the community hardening pilot, sure, it's 25 million out of 1.5 billion, plus the federal investment, which gets it to over 100 million. But if you then add in all of the investments we're making in education, the real target around home hardening is how many homes are hardened in the state. And so we're trying to make sure that we have programs that will empower people to do it themselves, as well as safety net programs that really help those lower income homeowners.
Wait.
What does that wind up being?
Okay, Doug is asking me to do math off of spreadsheets in my head. Here's gonna be a roundabout.
In front of 100 people.
In front of 100 people, yeah. Policy degree, folks. Princeton doesn't have a really good math program, but I skipped it. So basically, Doug, I think, let's see, you're talking about 110-ish or more million for last year's home hardening program. If you count the federal investment, you're talking about 300 million for grants that are available for home hardening. You're talking about like 10 million for UC advisors and additional defensible space inspectors going out. So I don't know, 450-ish million out of 1.5 billion. So like a third.
You're including the federal in there.
I am definitely counting the federal money because we worked really hard to get that. So if you would rather California taxpayers take 100% of it and tell the feds take a hike, you let me know, but we really want to make sure. Those are those FEMA hazard mitigation grants that I know like Sonoma County's gotten and others. And so we really want to make sure that we are sort of maximizing those. They're hard to get. And so, so bringing them in at the state level and then making them available as a program to the community has been a big game changer. Sorry for the slight sarcasm.
Yeah.
So.
Hi, thank you all so much for being here, for your strong presentations. It's amazing to hear you. I also have a question for you. So I was wondering, you mentioned some kind of jet fuel synthesis, which I'm assuming is pilot or whatever, because I haven't heard of it. Between that and some of the other products that come out from the reuse, so to speak, I guess, or utilization of wood chips, etc. Are there people who are doing some emissions calculations that are like, okay, so it could have burned here, but we're using it to create fire-safe conditions in the community, and now we're burning it elsewhere. So what, how does that work in terms of emissions? Like making wildfires different later.
Yeah, I know. I think it's a really important question and one we're navigating, right? So from a very basic standpoint, there's the what are the emissions from a catastrophic wildfire, right? And so are there things you can do with this material that remove it so that it is not as terrible as a catastrophic wildfire, right? And when a catastrophic wildfire burns, that's different than just the emissions of the actual wood that you're removing burning. Because you're then also burning homes, tires, laundry machines, and you're also burning all the way up to the treetops. So if you're actually physically removing the wood, that's naturally going to be less emissions than a wildfire. and even if you just pile burn it. But we want to say what's going to be better emissions than pile burning, right? So you can use really, like, I'm just kind of going up the spectrum here, right? So a curtain burner, right, is going to, burn at a higher intensity, produce more biochar, and so then straight emissions. So that'll be better emissions than just an open natural pile burn. But then you can go up a step, and you can then you look at the technology that we have already present in the market, right? So what technology exists today that can consume this material? Well, if you convert it to lumber, right, then you're sequestering that carbon for 100 years. Hopefully, build a nice house, and so, or you could put it into cross-laminated timber, which then is manufactured wood, right, which then compresses it. You have the technology in California right now, which you can turn it into woody biomass to energy conversion, right? Which, again, relative to wildfire, it's better. But the technologies that are coming on the market now, things like this sort of fossil fuel replacement. So instead of having a wildfire or a full emission open pile burn, you're offsetting oil or a fossil fuel. So that's going to be a better emission than both the fire and then the fossil fuel. But then you have the newer technologies that are coming out now that aren't market ready yet, but will be in the next 10 years, that will actually create carbon negative cycles, right? Where you then have no emissions and you can actually capture and store carbon underground from it. And Lawrence Livermore Labs has a really complicated and amazing technology there that I'd encourage you to look at, because I can't articulate it here very well. And so there's that full spectrum, and then there's just traditional stuff, like do you turn it into like particle board or plywood, and use it for current material. So I guess the state is trying to be a little bit, it is taking the stand of, and there's debate within the state about this, right? This isn't a settled discussion by any means, but the question, the way I'm looking at it, is what is better than a catastrophic wildfire, and what is better than open pile burning? And can we do something that is more constructive with this? Because also the other challenge is if you just leave it and open pile burn it, then you're complicating the wildfires that exist, right? We saw a fuel treatment that CAL FIRE had done where they had left it, they had done sort of a treatment over sort of multiple years. And so one had been slash piles that had decomposed over 4 years. One had just been treated, and so they hadn't been able to do anything with the slash piles yet. And one, they had done a prescribed burn and managed to take out the slash piles. So then when, I think it was the August Complex fire came through, you saw the area where there was decomposition of the slash piles, no problem, it was a healthy burn. Where the slash piles, where the prescribed burn had gone through, healthy burn, no problem. Where the slash piles were still there, so even though the land was quote unquote treated, because that treatment hadn't been completed, the slash piles were still there, it didn't become a crown fire, so it didn't complicate the fire's behavior, but what it did is it created a heat signature on the roots of the trees, and you still had major tree die-off. And so it still had that habitat impact, even though it was a public safety, it was okay. And so, but obviously long-term public safety, a bunch of dead trees is not helpful. So, so that's a long way of saying, like, there's a spectrum of technology here, and we need a bridge, right, to get to those carbon, so those true carbon negative cycles, but we need to do something with this material right now and do treat it like an emergency, because it is complicating our resilience to fire, and it's complicating the health of the forest. And so any destination that is better than a wildfire is going to be better for current emissions.
Any questions for other panel members? Maybe give the deputy a break here.
Lisa?
Someone? Yeah, over here.
Can I just have a follow-up on that?
Oh, yes, please, Marko.
Just a little different than the direct conversation of the byproducts, not every part of the landscape it's feasible to do utilization. We have some really steep ground that are in tactical locations that will affect communities. A lot of subsidies needed. So one size doesn't fit all in these utilization and treatment efforts. As we've been in the biomass game for almost 30 years. And another issue with the jet fuel, and I know there's a train that was potentially slated to come through your tribal lands, Belinda, moving that jet fuel from biomass utilization. So it's not all exactly perfect everywhere, and there's a lot of conversations that have to happen related to an analysis. It's not just an economic analysis, it's also a social equity analysis, and it's also one size doesn't fit all on these habitats we really care about, where it would be beneficial to have some fire on the ground. So it's both. So I just wanted to add that.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree. The whole issue of transporting that material adds another part of the carbon life cycle as well. So in situ versus ex situ is going to be challenging, but we've got a lot of smart people working on it. We have a question here.
Thank you, Lisa. So my name is Kendall Jarvis. I'm the Sonoma County Co-Ed Chair and the lead disaster relief attorney for Legal Aid of Sonoma County. And when you hear the number, $1.5 billion, I clapped, just like everybody else. We were all really excited about it, right? But with a place like California, when you have 40 million, roughly, people, 15 million households, if that were to be split between 15 million people, you're talking about giving everyone $100, right? If we say, okay, we're only going to do 1/10 of that, we're talking about giving people $1,000. So even just to reach 1.5 million households, the money's just not there. And the second piece to this that's important is that when we run into these federal dollars programs, they sound great, right, in theory, but we have consistently seen that there is a disconnect between the federal understanding of AMI and the actual reality on the ground. So we are losing the ability to utilize a lot of these programs because, I work in a nonprofit, and personally, it's not like I have money left over at the end of the month, right? But I wouldn't qualify for a lot of these programs. So the point being, I don't think most of us in this room would. Quite frankly, I would be surprised if we would, unless you have many children, which sometimes can be helpful in this one circumstance of financial dollars being leveraged. But the question is, what is the plan? We talk a lot about money, we talk a lot about getting access to these programs, but there needs to be a long-term trajectory, right? Even simplistic programs like we're gonna help you build, and we're gonna, help create a safe neighborhood. It's not enough incentivized money to actually get the job done. So what is that plan moving forward, and how are we going to help the average person that generally otherwise doesn't qualify?
And are your comments specifically about land management, resources for land management? Okay.
Both. I think both.
Okay. So was that for Deputy Morse or for the whole panel?
The whole
Yeah.
panel.
Okay.
Maybe Molly, she knows a lot about grants, but I don't want to put her on the spot because that's a little mean.
You can take a break.
So whoever
Yeah,
wants it.
we can.
Yeah, let Molly go forward, and then
Thanks, Kendall. The North Bay Forest Improvement Program is a first of its kind, and it's a try, right? Let's do something. Let's see if it works. And I think that for the incredibly tiny scale that the North Bay Forest Improvement Program is, I think that there's hope in it. So in 2020, when the contract was first signed, it was a $1.5 million project. That's nothing, right? That's a drop in the bucket. But since then, it's almost tripled in budget, right? We've gotten $3.5 million more dollars from CAL FIRE 12 months after first signatures. And so I say that because I think that there is room to really give kudos to CAL FIRE for being willing to invest in innovative solutions that don't have a proven track record yet. But let's do it, and let's see if we can scale so that we can take that budget, small but mighty at the beginning, and introduce it to different regions so that they can start implementing something that was once upon a time small, but now it's a lot bigger, and now we have data and other evidence to be able to say that we can invest more into this particular project and these particular programs that work. So I think that, maybe this is me being a little optimistic, but I think that there's a lot of room to just let it be a starting point with the expectation that it'll be more, but we have to start somewhere.
Marko, did you want to say something, or?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, you know, what I was reflecting on is thinking about treatments, you know, not what we would call understory thinning or fuels treatments. You know, you're looking at it, with everything said and done, $25,000 to $3,000 an acre. And this isn't just boots on the ground and chainsaws. This is technical assistance, foresters on the ground, programmatic communications, outreach, changing the paradigm of forest management. A lot of folks don't want to cut a tree. And so there's a lot of work to do to get that one acre treated. But when you're entering stands, whether they're on private non-industrial lands, tribal trust lands, or federal lands, you're entering sites that haven't seen fire in over 100 to 150 years. They're really dense, or they've been previously managed and grown back very dense, or they're plantations, you know, depicted really well in Elemental, that film, that part of it on some of the work of Dr. Dunn. But it's expensive work. It's the first heavy lift, especially with landowners, and we work with hundreds of landowners in our organization, to get that initial lift done. But then there's the maintenance, and the cost hopefully will go down, and then the creativity of what is the long-term investment. And the city of Ashland, Oregon, has a great model. It's a watershed tax. So their municipal watershed is right in the middle of U.S. Forest Service administered lands, surrounded by many, many small 40, 50, 10-acre private non-industrial parcels. And we got some Joint Chiefs dollars. We treated 14,000 acres within that watershed. But then the mayor had an idea. We need to have a watershed tax because we need to maintain our investment. So that funding, it's like $2 a month on the water bill. That money goes to maintenance. That money goes to prescribed burning in those locations where it's difficult to utilize biomass, which is most of the watershed is this steep. So we need to be thinking out of the box on taxes and community contribution, because those are services. Those forests are providing ecosystem services. And then additional co-investments from partners. Our tribal partners have really demonstrated the utilizing 93-638 funding, BIA self-determination funds that are going on the ground to benefit all communities. So we got to think really creatively about this for the long term. And it does need to be subsidized. We know that. Subsidy built all the logging roads. Taxpayers paid for that. Facilitated industrial harvest. So now we need to subsidize the ecological recovery of these landscapes and resiliency of the communities.
Thanks. Yeah. One of the things this reminds me of, and we've got all these NGOs up here, is the comment that was made yesterday during the Philanthropy for Disaster by the gal from the Colorado Community Foundation, that, you know, NGOs are the research and development shop that can pilot programs, get the data, and then the government can invest to scale up, right? When you know something works, which is what's happening here. We have a question here from Genevieve.
Hi there, Genevieve Taylor, Ag Innovations. I'm really curious about your lessons learned on working with landowners. I know there's a lot of wisdom in this room, but this is a great opportunity to hear from all of you about how you're helping landowners with the change management process, because what I'm hearing is it's not just about the treatment on the land, it's also the treatment of the brain and the heart as they're thinking about managing their lands. So. And then if you have any other examples of a watershed tax or things like that, I think more and more we're coming to the conclusion that there's public assets, like for us here in Lake Sonoma or the Russian River, that are privately protected, privately managed, and they can't do it on their own, especially if they're, you know, retired up there. Oh, I'm going to retire to the beautiful wilds of Sonoma and Mendocino County, and all of a sudden I realize exactly what that means in terms of vegetation management. So any other ideas that you've seen that have been successful around that?
Thank you.
I'll jump in on that one. I think there's a paradigm shift that really has to happen among many of our landowners, and you brought up a lot of folks that are retired that are moving up in this area, where there's a preservationist mindset of we don't touch Mama Nature, we leave it alone. And since human beings set foot in California on the areas that were habitable, we have been affecting the landscape, and we've been touching the landscape with fire, and that's what our ecology is designed for. So making sure that these landowners know that actually being an active conservationist, being involved with your landscape is something that is good for our ecology, definitely helps. And I would say one of the biggest pieces is helping them to navigate, once they hit that point of seeing that you do want to affect change, helping them navigate all of the different funding sources that are out there. Because as somebody that has gone through it, you have NRCS, you have NBFIP, you have CalFIP, there's all of these different funding sources that are very complicated, and how do you access those? And then once you're funded, making sure that those treatments are in a way that works with that landowner. I mean, we have some very, very private people that when you have somebody doing work on your land, that's something that you see, that you love, that you work on every day, and you want to make sure it's done in a way that they are comfortable with and happy with when they see the results.
And in addition to that, I would just add two things. One, going back to the idea of collaboration and using resource conservation districts or any other organization that's really, really close to the ground with the landowner to be able to lean on them to build trust. And I acknowledge that there is a very healthy amount of skepticism with a lot of these landowners, and that's okay. And we have, for example, the resource conservation districts and the folks there to be able to help them out. And in addition to that, it's also acknowledging that there needs to be a really big budget for outreach and education when we are going after these government grants, right? It can't just be a small percentage where we do a site visit every once in a while. No, we have a healthy outreach and education budget within these government grants so that we can go back and go back again and get them the help that they need, because we need them as much as any other part of this budget to be able to get this done well.
So I have one last question, and anyone can weigh in, but for a young person, let's say they want to get into this field, and we talked a little bit on workforce development, but I think it's so important, I want to close this question. What advice would you give a young person about finding a training program like Circuit Riders, Che, or Conservation Corps? Is there a centralized place, or how do young people find out about these workforce development opportunities?
Well, young people generally use Instagram these days. There's the Conservation Corps, there's Circuit Rider, there's Fire Forward, and a lot of these pieces are pieces that all work together. So, as an example, a lot of my kids will go and work or intern with Fire Forward, putting good fire on the ground. We just had a young woman that was able to go to Arizona, the Women in Wildfire program sponsored by the USDA, because through Fire Forward, they reached out to us to help recruit for that. So generally, I would say for our young folks, they have to be interested in it, and then once they reach out to any of the NGOs that are involved, it opens up a plethora of different options for them.
Yes, I'll tap onto a different approach in the communities we're working in. We are launching a tribal ecological forestry training program. And there's youth on the reservation communities and tribal communities that they don't even know they've had the interest until we've presented them with the opportunity. We have some great success stories, and these are young people that they're going to work on the youth programs, and they're feeding their families with the dollars from their paychecks. So one thing key is to pay them well. So we start our young people out at $20 an hour. I know it's still kind of low. It's 2022, but then outreach with simple flyers like this in tribal offices. Aliana put this one together, and a whole different engagement strategy. You're not going to reach a certain population through more governmental programs. It's going to look stale, intimidating, and having the leaders from those communities do that engagement. We have a tribal member, Leah Perizu, right now. She's basically going door to door. She's knocking on doors, trying to provide the opportunity, and as Belinda would talk about really well, we're trying to prevent youth suicides. We're trying to give an opportunity and then treat the landscape and bolster capacity, and then a pathway to higher education if that's desired, or an opportunity to work for their tribe, and then setting the stage and the scale for a better livelihood in this industry, that it's not going to continue to be the underclass industry it's been on the labor side. And we've seen that kind of abuse in federal and state programs, no disrespect, low paid wages for Latino and Latinx workers, trying to pay workers well, trying to give them health benefits, insurance. So with youth programs, it's that pathway, that entry point, that a lot of things are possible. And that can be achieved through that grassroots organizing and that having those community champions in those places that we want to recruit. And we've seen some great success with that.
And I just want to also, oh, go ahead, Jay.
Oh, I just want to dovetail off that real quick is one of the pieces that we haven't talked about is getting a contractor's license. And that's something that we really push for our kids because when they're working for us, that is years towards when they can qualify to get their contractor's license, you know, get some funding, slap their name on the side of a truck and go into business for themselves. And that is not only a protection for them, but it's a protection for consumers because there's a lot of yahoos out there right now practicing fire fuel mitigation and they're doing things that are frankly illegal. And when you have the training of being a contractor, then you know that you cannot take 50% up front to do a job and then not show up because they can go after your license, as well as having the protections of your bond as well. So that's something that I really try to push forward with our young people.
And I do want to thank Deputy Morse for the administration helping to make it the pathway to a burn boss easier. I'm not sure if you talked about that, but we actually have a member of our staff getting certified as a burn boss, and I think that's an incredible pathway for people who are already on the stewardship path to then, you know, we can retain that person. So yeah, thank you for that.
Big deal.
Well, there's so much we could talk about, but we want to wrap up, and so I want everyone to have a chance, maybe starting with Molly and going this way. Like, it's the end. This is the last session. People, this amazing audience has hung in here. You're the last keynote. This is the last panel. Thanks, Jennifer. Oh, no, there's one more? Okay, we're the second to last, apparently.
That's better.
But what is the one take-home message you want to send to everyone here on the way out? What's the one thing you want them to remember from what you shared today, the most important thing they can remember?
I really hate going first on these things, but I think that the word that keeps coming back to me that Deputy Morse said is nimbleness, and CAL FIRE exemplifying a willingness to be nimble and try new things is going to be able to pay off in spades in our future, so thank you.
Yeah, I feel like this is like turning an aircraft carrier, you know, where it's like you turn the wheel and then you actually start feeling the impact a little later. And so I feel like we've turned the wheel. And I feel like this crisis is solvable. And we've made the foundational investments. I agree that they need to be ongoing and continuous to be able to actually make sure that we sustain the scale that we're reaching towards right now. But we're going to be able to get this done because everybody's working on it as a team, and I think there is that sort of innovative thinking happening. We're trying to invest in that innovation, and we can solve this. So, I mean, let's look at this fire season, right? You know, this is we're at under 400,000 acres burned for the season so far, and the same number of fires we had last year with with almost 2 million acres burned in the last year and 7 million total over the last 3 years. So if you really look at sort of the scale we're at in terms of homes lost, and every home lost is a major impact, and the trend line is moving down, which is helpful. And that's not just the weather, right? It's not just the accidents. It is because we've put interventions in place in advance that are helping. It's because people are getting better at evacuation. So our goal is to try to get those trend lines in terms of down to healthy fire, home saved, lives saved. Mm-hmm.
Lisa asked me on Monday what gives me hope, and well, this is the Wildfire Leadership Summit, right? So my thought was the leaders that are in our community that are affecting positive change, that are being innovative, being excited and energetic, getting out there, and if we can follow a little bit in their footsteps, I think that we can affect positive change, we can make a difference in this very overwhelming enterprise, and we can have a brighter future for that next generation.
So thinking about these treatments done in an ecological way, in a mindful way, they work. So, you know, there's a lot of messaging out there. It's in documentaries. There's a perspective that they don't work. We have examples they do work. On the Black Hills Project, on the Almeida fire, where we treated along the riparian area in an ecological way. That's the one area that didn't burn. Now we have a salmon habitat greatly impacted by the loss of riparian vegetation. So these treatments work, and if we can layer in the social, the ecological, utilizing traditional ecological knowledge best practice on the ground, Western science, and train the next generation of stewards and bolster capacity, that's the reimagining we're talking about. Living with fire in a fire-adapted landscape, not being afraid of fire, being an ally to fire, but also knowing we need to pounce on it when we need to pounce on it. So we are reimagining that. The treatments do work.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to hand it to Jennifer. I'm not going to say anything else about the rest of the program.